Hi everyone, it's Ren here. How you doing, guys? Look, you can guess it's a little later than usual. I went for a walk prior to recording this video. Often what I do is I go for a walk afterwards to wonder whether I'm not going to make a fool of myself after posting the video that I just recorded. Nevertheless, I hope you're doing well. This is my second video in a row, so I'm making good on my promise, my commitments to start releasing more videos again. In this video, I would like to cover maybe a topic that I have covered, in little fragments here and there as part of other videos, topically, different videos. I've also covered it in the video with my parents that you might have seen. But a user by the name of Emma, hi Emma, thank you so much for being always present in my videos and commenting. Emma suggested the possibility of me discussing on the influence, I might be reinterpreting her question a little bit, but the influence that my parents have had on me and maybe my family at large, like what has been their influence. How do I perceive now that I'm age 32 and I'm supposed to have an ounce of wisdom and distance on the past of the little boy that became an adult, that is Ren. How do I see in the most detached possible way in this case, I guess, the influence that my family has had on that, and perhaps in order to delight those who enjoy the MBTI parlance, MBTI references, I'll try to maybe bring a little bit of an MBTI lens on this too. So I think that if I were to talk about how my family influenced the way I have been, there's been definitely a great deal of influence. It's probably the main driver that has made me who I am. I guess first, objectively, we might suggest that my family made me genetically who I am. I am genetic heir to my parents and my ancestors. So that's the first answer, and it's a pretty obvious one. Now, in terms of my relationship with my family, so what I'll try to do is talk about my formative developments in terms of my relationship with my family members, and then talk in the second part of this video a bit more about what might have been the type influences. If we subscribe to the idea that there is an environmental impact on the development of our functions, and if we accept the other idea that I am indeed an INFJ, and therefore someone whose stack is NIFETISE for the most part, then it might be interesting to look at, from the environmental point of view anyway, an educational point of view, or from the point of view at least of being brought up in the way that I was, what was the impact of my parents' own function use vis-a-vis their own types to have an impact on my own type development. So in terms of the personal development, I would say that I'm fortunate enough to have had, or to have, a family that I get on for the most part quite well with. I would say that my relationship with my brother, who appears in many of these, or at least two of these videos, three actually. Kevin is INFP is a member. Well, he's a participant in three different videos, and I would say that my relationship with him, obviously when we were kids, we went through some conflictual periods, but for the most part, we've been quite close. We have similar minds. Got on with my grandparents. Got on with my parents. Get on with my parents. I would say that my mum was, as you might have seen from the video, so a very sweet woman, very loving. A little bit fragile, I think, also. She's a fragile soul, very loving, fragile soul. My dad is more of a rock. He's very strong. He's a ENFJ, but also has a short temper. I think it's fair to say, and I think that even if he were to watch this, he would not disagree. My dad is someone who has a fiery temper, typical Southern Frenchman, which means in the past, when he went through stressful periods, especially after he quit smoking, and when my parents, who are now divorced, were arguing, divorced and getting on better than they ever have, really, ever since they divorced. 20 years ago almost at this point, which is kind of crazy. When they were going through their phase of arguing, and my dad had quit smoking, that was making him very, very, very edgy, on edge, very stressed out, very nervous, because he used to be a very heavy smoker. So he went through a phase of being very temperamental and kind of hard to deal with. And because he has always been this very charismatic figure, my dad is someone who takes a lot of space. So growing up, my brother and I think part of why we have such a type 4 element in our Enneagram type makeup anyway, to speak about Enneagram, the 4 I think is partly influenced paradoxically by my dad, who is a type 2 probably. He's a type 2 or type 3. It's hard for me to quite put my finger on it. If I had to give my dad's trait type, I would put it down as 2-8, either 2-8-6 or maybe 8-2-6. But I think he's more 2 than 8, to be honest, but he has a strong 8 in himself. But also the 2 side. So the way in which he manifests his influence and the 8 side of being kind of dominant is partly through this behavior in which you're summoned. You feel like you're summoned to. He's very kind and very helpful, but you feel like you're always summoned to be part of a group, and that can almost feel like sometimes that might threaten to dissolve your own personality. And my brother is a type 4. I'm a type 5 with a 4 wing. I think that's part of why we became that way. Part of how we evolved that way is in reaction to the need, like facing the need to assert, to really carve out our own unique identity in the face of having this very loving, this great, but nevertheless slightly overwhelming at times father, with whom I get on really well. I get on with my mum as well, of course. I get on with everyone. At the moment, at this present moment, my family is quite tight knit. So I have a brother, my parents, and then my maternal grandmother who's still alive. Her name is Rosie. She was born in Germany. She has a great backstory that maybe at some point I'll share in the video. She's an ESTJ, very strong woman. I never quite felt the ESTJ in her because she really, I have to say, she loves my brother and I so much that I think we get the most F that she can ever be, which is great. We've seen her ESTJ side at work, and always, to defend us to her advantage, so we love it. But she's an amazing woman, 85 years old, very strong, so strong. She's been through so much. She's born in Germany during the, the whole Hitler years, into war years, after the war. Then she emigrated up with my granddad, who met her there, back to Marseille, and she had nothing, and she did everything she could to become a teacher of German, and she'd done so well for herself. A very strong woman. Was listening to, even when she was bringing me to school, when I was 17 years old, she was bringing me to school. Couldn't drive at the time because in Europe you can't drive before 18. Not that I could have driven at 18 because I got my license at 30, but my granny would bring me to work, and she would be literally listening to Rammstein, and she'd have been she'd have been 70 at that time, so this is to give you an idea of how modern my granny is. So that's just a little snippet, to give you a sense of how my family has molded me and maybe my brother. I think that another dimension of it is that my parents have always had very high expectations of me, from an intellectual point of view, so from the point of view of study in the first place, and then from the point of view of professional achievements, which has in part been a great source of pressure. I have no doubt that part of that pressure I projected from them and imposed upon myself, even though they didn't phrase it directly. But I can tell you for sure that at various moments it's been made quite clear to me that there was a lot of expectation, and so that puts pressure on me at different points. But in hindsight, I guess I'm able to look at it a little wisely and say, well, perhaps that also made me push myself to be the best version of myself possible. So I'm mostly appreciative. And what I appreciate even more is that now that I'm in this this limbo sort of period of taking a sabbatical and wanting to reassess my priorities, my parents have been incredibly understanding of it. Of course, I'm an adult, I don't need their approval, but it's nice to know that your parents still support you and they understand, because they understand that I'm, at the end of the day, someone who with quite specific interests and specific personality and talents, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And that it's important for me to really manage to find what makes me happy, and it's not easy for me to know what makes me happy, and so to know that my parents at this point now, they really just support that and they want the best for me is really important. Now in terms of MBTI, I would say that, so I'm an INFJ, as you know. here's the not factual makeup. Jesus, I'm speaking terms from my philosophy. The MBTI makeup, functional makeup of my family. So my brother is an INFP, my dad is an ENFJ, my mother is an ISFP, and among my grandparents, who obviously had a bit less of an influence, but still probably did. So two of my grandmothers, the one I mentioned, ESTJ, the other is an ESFJ, I believe, and then. As for the grandfathers, my maternal grandfather was an INFP, potentially ENFP. My maternal grandfather, I think, was an ISFJ, potentially ISFP, but I'm inclined to think ISFJ. And I have to say that, I think that I took after some of the functional makeup of my parents and my brother by sheer exposure to them, interacting with them when I was younger. But also I think I took after. I happen to admire. Well, actually, I admired all my grandparents, but I think I admired more than anything. I admired my maternal grandmother. I still admire her, the one who's still alive, and my paternal grandfather, the ISFJ. I loved him very much, and I was very, very crushed when he passed away. But so I think that if I start from a little further away with my grandparents, I've always kind of wanted to emulate the kindness of heart and the almost how to say this, instantaneous emotional expressiveness of my granddad, because that was so formative to me, made me feel so good. I've always seen that as a big influence and inspiration. And my granny, who's an ESTJ and who's not very, very different than my ISFJ granddad, I would say that's what I admire in her is well, many things, but her reliability and her strength. She is tough. She is so strong. I'm nowhere near as strong as she is, but sometimes I ask myself, in this situation, what would she do? And that helps me, and that probably has forged my personality a little bit as well. Sometimes people tell me that for an INFJ, I can be quite strong-minded and a bit of a strong grip. And after all, I have 8 in my trait type. I'm a 5 for 8, so maybe that partly comes from my granny. I have no doubt it also comes from my dad, because despite the fact that there's been bumpy times throughout my relationship with my dad, he's still been very, very, very influential on me. I mean, we are, as he said in the video that we made together, our minds, in some ways, they are quite similar, intellectually speaking, very quite rational, but also interested in things that are not, at first sight, necessarily to be understood through the lens of rational critical thinking, and having an openness towards that. My dad has it too, so I think that influenced me. Definitely, I took after my mother, and so did my brother, in terms of just being very, very introspective and overthinking everything. And my mother does that, my brother does that, and we're kind of the only people in the family. It's weird, because I'm so like that, my brother is so like that, my mum is like that. My dad is not. My dad, if anything, doesn't spend enough time introspecting, I think, with all due respect for this great patriarch. And similar to my grandparents, obviously I don't know them as well, they're from a different generation, but I don't get the impression that they would have been the type of people to dwell or overthink that much. Maybe when you've known the war, that changes things, but definitely took after my mum for that. We're very, very similar. We ponder, we brood, we spend time reflecting all the time, and we consider alternatives, and and it's too much of it. And my brother is a bit like that too, for sure, or very like that. Now, in terms of the feeler side, well, everyone in my closest family, so parents and brother, everyone is an F-type, and I would say that I'm probably the closest to being a T-type, to be honest, in the sense that I'm the one who's the most able to sometimes abstract from my feelings, and at the same time, there's only other moments where I'm the one who's the least capable of abstracting from my feelings, and it just comes out. And not necessarily because I'm stressed or I'm having a meltdown, it's just because, I said it in another video, I'm a very emotional type, a very emotional person, but sometimes this emotional side manifests itself very strongly in certain situations, and I don't really know why it expresses itself that strongly. I know why it expresses itself. When I read Proust, for example, sometimes I just bawl my eyes out, and the passages are objectively moving, but why do I cry so much? Who knows? And other times I'm able to sort of like abstract from that. If I feel like a situation needs to be strong and needs to be kind of tough, I'm able to do that maybe more than my dad probably will also be able to do that. Perhaps my brother and my mother a bit less. So introversion, I'm very much N like my father, my brother, and also my maternal grandfather was extremely N, which is why I think that he might have been ENFP rather than INFP, although you can be very N and INFP. So I think that that's the part of the family that's kind of head in the clouds, kind of a teacher type. All of us are kind of teacher types. My granddad was a teacher. My brother is a teacher. My dad is not. He's an engineer, but he does teaching on the side. I'm not a teacher, but I like to make videos and tell people about stuff. So maybe there's a little bit of a teacher side to me as well. And then the F side, the J side, I really inherited, I think, from my father. My mother and my brother are really not organized, and I love them to bits, but I just have to be honest, they're not very organized. My father and my maternal grandmother, the strong woman, super organized. They do their things. Now, I'm not quite as organized as my dad or my maternal grandmother. Like an INFJ is likely not going to be quite as organized as an ESTJ, obviously, or even an ENFJ. Because both of these types are a dominant extroverted judger, but there is definitely extroverted judgment in my stack, and potentially also slightly higher up SI. Who knows where that comes from? Than you would typically expect for an INFJ. But my dad and the way that he's able to take on a task and never give up until the task is done. When I start something, I finish it. I do not know what it means to start something and abandon it. I finish everything I do, and my dad is like that, and I think he's inspired that, and I'm grateful to him for that, because that's a great skill. So that gives you an idea of how my INFJ-ness was born of the, not just my genetic makeup, but also my environment, as well as the trajectory in life that I have followed as a result of being, obviously greatly molded by my family backgrounds and all these people that matter to me greatly. And on these words, I will go downstairs to have dinner with my mum. See you guys, hope you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments what you thought. See ya!